as a team, and we just feel the really good thing is about all these guys that we got. They all have different flavors. And, they're not all cut out of the same box. Every single guy has their own unique plight and style and, like I say, flavor. So we feel really, really good about that. Obviously I know that it was more so on the defensive side of the ball, but we're excited about each one of them. But take any questions.
Yeah, Brett, what was the value of having had a year with this team, actually knowing these people, and they weren't just, video and all that you inherited, but guys you actually were with for a year to build on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. One of the biggest things I think is everybody kind of knowing the system and kind of everybody knowing how to use the same language when it comes to evaluations, and then also with your reference to not being on Zoom and all that, and being around guys, sometimes you can just feel them a little bit more. You can feel their body language. You can kind of feel their presence of how they truly feel about one thing or the other. So I think that meant a lot. I also do say the continuity just with our coaching staff. I think that was huge. And even when we made a tweak here or there, everything is about collaboration. So we always kind of over communicate that on all accounts. So definitely that's a great point you brought up, that it was a lot better this year.
First, I want to congratulate you on the sweatshirt swag. You didn't bring out the sweatshirt. So now,
thank you.
Now passionate you've been about the HBCU products, giving them the opportunity you promised you would look at them.
Sure.
I saw you make a splash and bring in one of those guys. Just kind of take us through the process, and what made you want to take a chance with James Houston?
Yeah, James was I didn't know a lot about James, as we were kind of going through the fall process, and then kind of when he hit the All-Star circuit and made some noise there. And then, he kind of went on and so forth. And throughout the process, his name just kept coming up. And, the scouts had a lot of buy-in on this player. And then it got to, the OTT guys. And then, our director, Dave Sears, our college director, he had a lot of passion about his evaluation and what he thought his potential could be. And then the more I looked at it, and I'm looking at his production and, what he's done in the past, he's got really long arms. He's explosive. Obviously he's done some different things from off-ball position at University of Florida, and obviously his sack production at Jackson State that he had this past year speaks for itself. So we're really excited. I always say, I know that when it comes from an HBCU perspective, I know a lot was made in the past, especially last year, about none being selected. So I was very happy to see, even before we took James, but others selected. I think, it was the Fayetteville State kid and the South Carolina State kid. So it was good to see progress made on that front. My mom gives me crap about it all the time, saying, why aren't you drafting any HBCU players? And so I said, but I've always said about that too, they have to control what they have to control too. Like, they don't get drafted just because they're at HBCU. Like, they have to earn it. And so these kids earn it. And so, last year just wasn't that caliber process. It was a great run for HBCU players. For a long time, you had your Darius Leonards and Tariq Cohens and Brandon Parkers, and then it kind of took a little dip there, with COVID. So it's good to see that we're making a lot better progress now.
Having a plan for the guys you draft with Josh specifically. So I know things change, and when you see them on the field and maybe get a better evaluation of their skill set, maybe that changes. But the initial vision for the three defenders you added today in terms of where they fit, with maybe Malcolm, weak side, strong side, middle, with James, edge rusher, you said off ball. Like, where do you see these guys kind of initially fitting in the defensive plan?
Yeah, well, the first thing before we even kind of look into deep in part of the, the schematic specifics, we want to see how well these guys can help on special teams first, especially when you're getting into guys on day three. But I do think that I do think that Malcolm, he can play our inside linebacker spot. He's a high caliber special teams player first and foremost. But I do think that he'll be able to come in and compete, at one of the inside linebacker spots. And then even down to Chase Lucas, as a corner, you see what he can contribute as special teams. But then you talk about from a versatility standpoint, I think Chase Lucas can play outside. I think he can play inside, and then obviously we talked about James Houston with, I think, his versatility about the ability to rush, ability to play off the ball. And then, obviously he's had special team production back when he was at University of Florida. So we think that all those guys can help on special teams and have versatility.
You referenced all the draft picks you spent on defense. I think it was 6 of 8.
Yeah.
What does that say about your faith in the offense and Jared Goff and what you have now in that unit?
Yeah, well, obviously we talked about Jared at length, pretty much all spring. We think that he's a quarterback that we can win with. And obviously we've made some additions on the outside, starting with free agency. And then, we obviously did some things in the draft. We felt pretty good about our offensive line. We didn't go into the draft saying that we would ignore it. Obviously, we were happy that we were able to add a guy like James Mitchell when he gets healthy. It was another guy that had a lot of conviction throughout the building. But it's really no specific, we're not going to say don't draft offense. We're never going to pass up good football players. If the best player on the board is an offensive guard, and you're not just going to go past that good offensive guard and get a lesser player just because he's a defensive tackle or he's a safety. So it just happens it lined up that way. And but I'm happy and everybody's excited about it.
Big picture-wise, though, do you think, Dan had said before, right, like Jared maybe didn't have the right parts around him at times last year, so the outside evaluation was unfair. Is 2022 like a no excuses sort of season for him in the offense? I mean, are all the pieces there that he and they need to be successful?
Yeah, I don't want to say no excuses, but I do think the more weapons and the better resources that you surround your quarterback with, I think it's just better and it helps them out more. You could say that for any quarterback. He obviously will have more coming into this year. I really admire and appreciate what he did with what he worked with last year. But, so I wouldn't say it's no excuses, but, we just expect him to be set up for successes, which Dan and I said that's what we're going to do for Jared.
That said, do you feel like you attacked the defense as much as you wanted to going in? I know it was how it fell, but there had to be some method and plan to attacking this defense and loading up on the lines and everything else.
Yeah, it wasn't, like we knew that we had, if you could say, more questions in terms of especially depth on the defensive side of the ball, maybe even some questions even above that. But again, we don't go into it anchored and saying, hey, look, man, we have to just draft defense. It's just, if that's the best player, then that's the best player. We had a sense that, with all the things that we wanted to do, we had a sense that it might tilt a little bit defense, but we didn't think like maybe we had 8 picks, if it was 4 defensive guys, 4 offensive guys, if that's how it fell, that's how it fell. But when I looked up, I didn't even count it till after we drafted Chase that I looked at, I was like, oh, we were 2 and 8. So, but again, that's just how we roll. We just want to get the best player. But we didn't want to be anchored going to it. But we're happy with how it turned out.
We've got 3 defenders today. I think easy to say traditionally undersized for their position, but all really athletic guys, like high-end testing numbers.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have maybe one of the most famous cases of undersized and athleticism in Aaron Donald in the past. So, like, how do you balance those philosophically, the athleticism versus maybe being a prototypical build at a position?
Yeah, well, it's a lot of factors that you can look at. There's a lot of variables that play into that. If a guy is if he's a little bit more deficient in one area, say it's height, or say it's bulk or arm length, how well does he compensate in other areas? Does his explosiveness compensate for what he might be deficient of in this area? Does his motor compensate? Does his instincts compensate for, lack of somewhat of, foot speed here or there? So we kind of look at everything. We look at all those factors because there's some guys that they have all the size in the world, and they're not very good football players. They might have all the height, weight, speed in the world, and they're not good football players. So you got to weigh it all. It's a lot of factors that weigh into it, but at the end of the day, we just stick to just trying to find football players, and I think that's what we found today.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You've mentioned versatility, I think, with everyone pretty much that you've drafted this year. I mean, with the way the game's played now, is that something you have to have in everyone you bring in, or can you look at a guy as a specialty piece right now, or do you need to do that?
Yeah, I do think there is some time, well, not sometimes, there were a lot of times, Chris, that I remember Dan and myself we're trying to, construct the roster during the week, during the season, and, sometimes you do get stuck with, like, this guy can do this and kind of this only, and this guy, well, he can play this spot and that spot, so that opens up some flexibility. So, when you have those guys that are versatile, it does give you some flexibility from a roster standpoint, and hopefully if these players develop, again, we're just talking about rookies, but, going forward, if these guys develop into what we think they can be, I think it will offer up a lot of roster flexibility for us going forward.
James Mitchell said, you guys had some contact with his agent recently, just sort of saying, hey, if he's there as an undrafted guy, we want to sign him.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know, smoke screen, or was that an indication maybe that you ran out of draftable guys on your board and you had to dip into the UDFAs? I don't know how deep the talent ran this year, I guess is kind of.
Yeah, no, James was on our draft board as a draftable player. He always was. It was unfortunate that he had his injury, but when the scouts start calling people's agents, they're calling in the later rounds, and that can happen. They don't always know exactly what's going to happen, what's unfold. We try to do the best that we can from a communication standpoint. We made a lot of improvements with that this past year, but James Mitchell was always a draftable prospect for us. He was on our board, and we felt good about taking him.
Coming out of this, how comfortable are you with where your roster is now? I know you never have a finish line with roster building, but are there any areas of concern you still have that need to be addressed before you really get into the offseason program?
You know what? You made a great point, Justin. It's never really complete. Obviously there's more windows to add players. The season doesn't start till September. But, I will say on both sides of the ball, especially from a depth standpoint, there's still areas where we can still add, and we'll definitely look to do that for sure.
Stuff obviously going on right now.
Yeah.
Too. Your roster's pretty full, though. How active are you? Do you want to be in this UDFA process here?
Yeah, it's fuller than it was last year, a little bit, which is a good thing. But so we are active. We might not be able to sign as many as we were able to sign last year, but again, that's a good problem to have. You just got to be a little bit more strategic and selective, which we have a really good college free agency process, a very collaborative process. We put a lot of work into that process, so we feel good about it. You just got to just sign a little bit less guys.
You give them more money, if you got that pool to split up different ways. Then I don't know.
It's case by case. It depends on the position. It depends on. It's actually a few different factors that go into that. But obviously, if you're signing less, then you might have a little more at your disposal there.
A lot of the same traits, including, I think almost every one of them was a captain, except maybe one or two. That by design?
We look into the intangibles. We heavily scrutinize the intangibles of every football player. And their football character, as we've talked about in the past, and you guys have heard me say it at length, and I'll always believe this till the day I die, is that, how much passion and how high your football character is, and, what your desire is for this game, that's going to dictate your success. You can have all the height, weight, speed in the world and all the physical traits, but, But, you know, if the game doesn't mean everything to you and you don't have a high football character and your intangibles aren't up to standards, then it's going to be hard for you to find success in this league. This league is very hard. You know, it's hard to win games, and it's because the talent level, you know, it's not hard to find height, weight, speed here and there, but, you know, to find the football players that have those things. So that's really important to us, and that's why you see a lot of that with those guys we take.
How do you handle those gray areas where there's great talent and maybe not as great? In other words, it's always not necessarily cut and dried. Did you have decisions like that you had to make?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you know, you'll still walk across that. You'll still have to make those decisions, you know, every now and then. But we have a good vetting process where, you know, if certain guys don't meet certain standards, certain thresholds, then, you know, they may be in or out of consideration. But we trust our process, and, you know, we tackle those case by case.
Did you find it any easier, I guess, in talking to players this year, that they had a better sense for what you guys were about than last year when everything was so scrambled in those 3 months?
Yeah. Yeah, it was very noticeable, and it was a good feeling to experience, Chris, because, you know, last year, you know, again, we're just scrambling, trying to get guys in. And actually, you know, starting in free agency, you start hearing guys talking about, you know, wanting to come to Detroit, and, you know, that buzz and the word is getting out amongst their peers with other teams. That felt really good to hear. But then, you know, these college kids, you know, they work out at these facilities, you know, with other pro athletes, you know. So not sure if the buzz is coming from there, but it did feel good this time of the year, the process, that, you know, a lot of kids did want to, and their agents too, you know, they want to send their players here because of they hear what our culture is. And I say it all the time, you know, we don't have to sell our culture. We don't have to do a pitch or anything. Just ask the players that have been in the building, and they can sell it for us.
Second question, just for you, I mean, this was your second time through it, so was it easier, harder? You know, did you get a little more sleep, you know, the last couple of days? How do you?
No, it did. It today felt longer than it did last year. Yeah, it did. But you know, I want to say, was it the night before last? And got home about like 2:30 a.m. And then I got up around like 6, and I was like, I gotta go back to sleep, and I just couldn't. You're just wired, and it's just. But that's what you really appreciate. That's what you really respect. That's how you know that it's running through your veins, man. You know what I mean? And the last thing I was thinking about is going back to sleep. I was just thinking about, you know, what we did the night before, what we're about to do today, and that's how you know that you're not only with the right people, but you're doing what you're supposed to be doing.
You mentioned the improvements to the UDFA process. Heard it was a little bit of a hurricane kind of back there last year, and sometimes it's you don't know what you don't know, right? So I guess how important was it to experience something like that and maybe didn't go as planned, and to be able to, I guess, improve on it in year 2? Is that maybe like a prime example of year 1 to year 2 for you?
Yeah, you know, and it starts with we have an entire task force for that, and those guys work very, very hard at evolving our process from the UDFA standpoint. I do think there'll be organized chaos at all times. That's just a little bit of part of just that's the tradition and the history of that process. But we had a much more streamlined this year, and I really appreciate all those guys' hard work to evolving it, using a lot more technology, and then improving the communication of the whole process. So hopefully, I don't know who we all signed. Hopefully I get some good news when I go back upstairs. So hopefully it worked.
It was streamlined enough to get you down here early. So we
But that's because I want to go home and get some sleep. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.